now the time is, my time has gone away. For those of you online, we're just filling in the last couple of minutes, a couple of seconds before it's time. As soon as we have this report off, I'm just going to start. And isn't it great? I didn't have to call you all to order with my little dinging button. So thank you. All right, we will resume our meeting. And to start, I would actually just like to welcome Graham Pollard, our climate change advisor, on item 2.5, TCDC Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory Report. And I believe we also have Martin Lynch with us to answer all of the curly questions. Welcome. Lead us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and everybody online as well. This report is to present the greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 2022-23 for Council, which was prepared by Martin Lynch, hence Martin being online. I would ask that you would take the written covering report as read. And I have a presentation to then concentrate on the inventory itself. And the advantage of the presentation is so that we all are looking at exactly the same charts, including the people online are able to keep with us. Happy to take questions as we go, and I say Martin's online to help with those. So first up, this is just looking at the various categories of our emissions, and as you can see, the so-called Scope 1 emissions, the Category 1 emissions, those are the emissions that we are responsible for. We produce them, and followed by the Scope 2, the indirect emissions from the purchased energy, which in our case is electricity. Those two account for 90% of the emissions that we have measured in this inventory. The others you see there, Category 3, Category 4, and there's 5 and 6 where we recorded nothing. Those are called the Scope 3 emissions. We are responsible for them only insofar as they are things that we purchase. So they could include air travel, which obviously we purchase, could be accommodation, and they can potentially include things like construction materials and infrastructure, so things that are produced, delivered, installed for us because that's what we've asked to happen, and of course what we pay for. Our future challenge is working out how we account for those. So they're not included really to any great extent in this inventory because we haven't got the data at this stage. Breaking that down to look at some trend data, the big story here, as you will see, is a large increase in those Scope 1, Category 1 direct emissions. Principally, as we'll see, from wastewater, our biogenic or organic emissions. And the main reason for that is that, as luck would have it, this was the year that we had lots of storms, lots of rain, lots of water, lots of stormwater flow getting into wastewater systems, people probably diverting stormwater into wastewater systems that they shouldn't, and things like that. And as the emissions are calculated on the volumes being treated through the wastewater treatment plants, then obviously if the volume goes up, then our calculated emissions go up. So we are potentially looking at a freak year, but we have to bear in mind that if we get more storms and potentially more rainfall events or heavy rainfall events, this kind of emissions could be higher in future. Not higher than we've recorded here, but we just need to bear in mind that they could still be elevated in future years. Note also the reduction in Scope 2, that's the electricity. We'll come to that one shortly. And you will see that in the next two categories that are showing there, Scope 3, Category 3 and Category 4, some slight increases really coming off the back of the COVID years, particularly around transportation as staff are out and about more than they were during lockdown. But the big story is the Scope 1. Breaking that down further still, again going back to the year in question, obviously our wastewater biogenic emissions are high, also our electricity. Now there are a couple of things on the electricity. If you look at the second and the fifth columns, the fifth column is the electricity that's lost during transmission to us. That happens anyway. We've also got, so they should really be read together to a certain extent, in that if we use more electricity, our transmission losses will go higher as well. And then transportation. Now with the fourth and the sixth column, so we've got diesel transport and petrol transport. And there's also stationary diesel. Now the stationary diesel is for really running the wastewater treatment plants during the peak week or two of the year, and that's just really a financial arrangement to keep costs down, so we're not paying the peak electricity charges for the other 50 weeks, sorry, of the year. That would be long-term pricing, wouldn't it, if it was done over 50 years? To spend too long. So again, looking at that in terms of trends, again, we've got that peak for the wastewater because of the storms, and electricity and the transport diesel and petrol are improving. So we can see where the major effort needs to be for reducing our carbon emissions in wastewater and electricity. But the Scope 3 towards the right side of the chart is really very much underreported. So as I say, we've got to work out how we try to capture those in future. Talking of electricity, this just shows us where most of our electricity is being used. So 88% of our electricity is being used on water and wastewater services. Now that doesn't mean to say that putting solar arrays or wind turbines and things to run our treatment processes is going to work, because those processes need to continue 24/7. When you've got storm conditions, nighttime, power outages and so on, we've got to still run those processes. Buildings that house those processes, that might be a different matter, but that's something we can certainly look into going forward. And talking of going forward, we then come to our roadmap as to where we go from here. So it's all very well reporting what's happened. We need to plan and see what actions we can take for the future. So if we do nothing, or nothing more than we're doing at the moment, our emissions will reduce anyway in the next few years. So this is the orange or the brown coloured line. And the reason for that is that our electricity supplies are getting greener. The previous government set a target to have completely renewable energy in our electricity supplies by 2030, and this government's committed to the same. So even if we do nothing, then our emissions should still reduce, but when we get to about 2030, they're then going to flatline, because obviously if it's 100% renewable, it's not going any better than that. It only gives us about a 12% reduction on our emissions. This is from the baseline, that's the second column from the left, not the peak, which is the year we've been reporting. but it's still only 12%. The national target is 50%. So that's if we do nothing. Now, the New Zealand emissions reduction plan has separate targets for biogenic, that's the organic, and the non-biogenic emissions. So reducing our wastewater biogenic emissions could be capital intensive, and we'll therefore need to wait till the 2027 LTP before we can really do anything on that, because obviously we're too late to get it into the 24 LTP. So taking the biogenics out, if we do nothing on the non-biogenic, so scopes 2 and 3, our emissions will still reduce because of the greening of electricity, and they look set to reduce by 50%, which is the national target. Great, but we haven't done anything. And then they'll flatline. So even after 2030, we'll still need to reduce our emissions further. So that sounds good, but I'm quite sure that council will be interested in us doing rather better than that. So if we show a bit of leadership, undertake some initiatives, the estimate is that we can reduce our emissions further, and on this chart we are approaching 60% reduction. Now we need to examine the options for making the extra reductions. We'll need to examine those further. It might be as we put our emissions reduction plan together, we can push our target a little higher so that we've got a little bit more ambition in there. Even if we don't quite hit the target, it's better to say go for 60 and hit 58 than stick at 50. But there's more work to be done examining that. And as I say, after 2030, there's going to be more work that we're going to need to do. But that's looking quite positive, I think. Some ideas on what those initiatives could look like. Again, these are only ideas. They're not saying this is what we're going to do, but the things that we could look at is seeing what we can do on the biogenic emissions. As I say, we're going to have to do a lot of business cases and option analysis in the next 3 years for that. Whatever we do on this building, there might be options for energy efficiency, maybe even generating some power ourselves. The electrification of the fleet is continuing, of course, and investing in EV charging stations might actually speak more towards the district emissions than councils themselves, but there's probably a win for council as well there. So there are things we can do. And on the capital side of things, I'm not expecting you to look at the detail on this by any means, but this shows that we've got a range of options in the 3 water space for things that we can do, and also the infrastructure. So this is really where your scope 3 emissions are likely to come in there, and how we can try to decarbonise there as much as we possibly can. So there's plenty to do in developing our own emissions reduction plan, which is our next step. It's the next step in the climate change programme. It is underway, but we've got to develop targets and initiatives and things like that. So quite happy to take any questions as long as I can answer them, and if I can't, then I'll throw it across to Martin. Thank you.
Excellent. And I just want to note for Martin and Delhi that I can't see you anymore. You've gone away. So if you have questions, you'll probably just need to put it. Oh, no, I might be getting you back. But I was actually going to ask if we could have one of those slides back up again. Sorry, yes, sure. That doesn't matter. Because I was going to ask a question about one of them. What was the first of the graphs? Yeah, no, sorry. No, you know what? Don't worry. I can phrase the question regardless. But before I do that, Before I do that, I see Deli's got her hand up, so let's go with Deli first. Okay.
Hi team. Yeah. Two things. One is definitely coming up with initiatives to reduce emissions, but also where does reforestation or planting programs come into it in terms of an offset to our emissions? So that's question one. Just an aside, and I want someone in the staff to pick this up, we've got some new generators, because I saw the graphic on the diesel generators, and some of them are not housed. So I just drove past the Cook's Beach one, for example, which is brand new, cost a hell of a lot of money, and it does not have any sort of housing. So it's exposed to salt sea air, which will reduce its efficiency and also its lifespan. So it's going to cost us at some point. So I just want somebody on staff to follow that one up. But the question is around planting initiatives and how we can do those alongside reduction of emissions.
Okay, thanks for the question on forestry. We have struggled to get some of the data, which is why it's not in the inventory report. That's starting to trickle in now as it happens. Our forestry offsets are not as high as we would have liked. We've got some old forestry that we're not getting the offsets from. By the looks of things, this is just on initial information. Again, we need to look into this a bit further. The problem with forestry offsets is that it's very tempting to simply say, well, we've got so much forest, we've reached net zero carbon, so we don't need to do any more emissions, do we? Well, the key thing is, and this is said nationally and internationally, we need to get emissions down as far as we possibly can. Once we've got as far as we can, then those residual emissions can then be offset by things like forestry. It's not a case of once we reach net zero and we're taking into account what forestry we have, then we're sweet. We need to keep pushing these emissions down as much as we can.
So Graham, with respect, that was my comment, that alongside our reduction program, if we become negative carbon emission, that's wonderful. It's absolutely brilliant. So what I'm saying is that we look into the forestry or native bush reforestation or whatever alongside, certainly not as, oh, well, we're fine, we've got all that forestry. I think you missed my point.
Yeah, if we can push our emissions down as far as possible, then again, the more forestry we have, forestry we have, that helps to offset not just across the district or not just across council emissions, but also nationally. So certainly as we look at the emissions reduction plan, then one of the questions that we can ask in that is, what is the potential for the management of our current forestry holdings? What is the potential to expand that forestry holdings? That, of course, is financial as well. So all of that is something that we can look into. So once we've got our emissions down as far as we can by 2050 or whatever it is, then hopefully we've got enough forestry offsets to offset those residual emissions, so we're net zero carbon or better. It also helps across the region and across the country as well. So we actually become a net carbon sink for New Zealand.
I'm just going to butt in here. Forestry holdings aside, we actually have a large number of parks and reserves as well, and we've been through an exercise in the last couple of years where we've looked at the reserve management plans, and I remember some of the reserves having quite significant numbers of trees on them, but maybe not managed in a way that is getting everything we can out of those trees in terms of looking after them and then providing biodiversity benefits. So that's another avenue as well to say, what do we have within our parks and reserves? And certainly I know of a few spaces, public spaces that we have that are effectively locked in between sets of houses and are just standing with trees, like the one up Centennial Drive, whose name I've forgotten. There's one sort of tucked in behind the houses there, and we effectively can't get to it very easily. And so maybe trees is the only answer for that. But yeah, it's a conversation to have. My question, I did have another question, and I'll get to you in a second, Rika, was about those biogenic emissions and what we can reasonably do to bring those down. Because as you say, it's an anomalous result at the moment, but storms might be a very real part of our future. Every year, every second year, the amount of water might, this might be a reality. And so is there anything that we can do that's going to be an investment now that's going to be able to keep those low? Because it's huge.
Yeah, indeed. And that is, again, one of those lines of investigation that we're going to need to pursue with the Waters team and whoever to see what we can do. And on that last slide there, I'm just looking at it on my page here, there's 7 possible ways that they've got to look at how to reduce emissions from wastewater, and anything from reusing biosolids, energy efficient blowers, ultraviolet, all and modifying processes and things like that. But that again is all dependent on the amount of water that is going into the wastewater systems. So if people are diverting their stormwater at home into the wastewater systems, how do we dissuade people from doing that? So there's all kinds of questions. There's no simple straight line answer to any of these things. It's very complex. You just look at the different directions this conversation is going. Lots of directions. Complex.
I'm also thinking of these emissions in terms of the fact that we are currently the sole holders of our 3 water infrastructure, but with anything that goes forward, whether we have a CCO or whether, anyway, it's lots of unknowns in that regard.
Yeah.
Rika, did you have a question? Oh, looked like you had your hand up. Martin's got a question though. Oh, okay.
Yeah, hi Graham, thanks for the report. I just wanted to check, so I think I heard you say that at some point we run diesel generators to keep our peak, stop paying money for peak power. Is this something, morally that is a good thing? I don't know that I've ever been asked as a councillor that and I realise it's operational. I acknowledge it's operational, but I don't think I've ever been asked if I'm happy about running a generator to keep spot power down. And you could argue that, well, doing that means that they're not having to power up great big thermal generators in places like Huntly and stuff, but it's still burning diesel. That's one question. And the second question was, last term, PowerCo came to us with some ideas for trying to keep the lights on for about 4 days a year where there's peak issues, and their solution, after much, very little thought, was to install generators around the peninsula, including at Coromandel and Whitianga and maybe somewhere else. At the time, there was some opposition in the council, but we got voted down about them looking at other options. Have those generators gone into those sites? Is that something PowerCo's done, or is that kind of ground to a bit of a halt? You might not know. Sorry, rambling question. I'm going to shut up.
Through the chair, I could answer that. They are currently installing one in Matarangi, and that is a lot in response to the Cyclone Gabrielle last year, where Matarangi was a particularly isolated community where they couldn't get any power or water for over 3 days. They were basically locked in. It is something that we've been discussing around, the resilience and how we can improve what the energy sort of supplies are. As you're probably aware, we have a lot of, with the resilience kits as well, that it is generator focused, but it is something that, we are talking with the, different agencies about how that can be improved.
Thanks. In terms of the use of the generators, I'm going to throw this one across to Martin and acknowledge his deeper understanding of how the energy business works. Sorry, Martin.
Sure thing. Hi everyone. So with the question related to the generators at the wastewater treatment plants, it's I think there was reference there to the 4 days that the Coromandel experiences, right over that holiday peak. And what we found was that this is through the CoLab Energy and Carbon program, that Thames-Coromandel District Council is incurring a lot of network charges as a result of those 4 days, and the rest of the time there's actually the demand charges or network charges are much lower. And so that's where that operational change came about, using the generators for 3 to 4 days of the year to run and reduce the peak demand on those wastewater treatment plants, which then generated, I believe it's $80,000 to $100,000 in savings a year. In this particular case with last year, I think beyond that peak demand running, we've also had a lot of other running for because of power outages and for security of supply, etc. And so that is why we're seeing quite a lot of stationary diesel use for FY23, and I'm not expecting that would occur for this financial year, but that's something to take into account. Does that answer the question?
Makes me want to ask more questions, actually.
But you had a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. Look, I know there's generators being installed up in Coromandel at the moment, and I understood they were for resilience only. They're the ones up Whangapā Road, and I totally supported that, even though they burn diesel, they're only there for resilience during storms and what have you, and I can live with that. That's not a problem. But I didn't know we'd actually install generators at wastewater plants to beat peak costs. Is that what you're telling me, Graham? So no?
No, they weren't installed particularly for that reason. They were already there for backup. Is all that's happened is they've been so the availability of the generators has been utilised to run for those 3 or 4 days. Yep.
And that's not because there's a shortage of power, it's because power's more expensive. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, so PowerCo set their charges, and this may not be completely correct, but they basically set it on the highest peak demand that occurs in a half hour or period across the year, and then that then applies for the next 12 months. And so what we sought to do was to drop that down so that Thames-Coromandel wasn't being charged for that.
I can see the pic. I didn't know that. That's actually very enlightening, and I can understand why we would do that actually now. For 3 or 4 days, it would make a huge difference. Of about, did you say $80,000 or $90,000 earlier on?
$80,000 to $100,000, yeah, depending. Yep.
Fine, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question each for either of you. The first one I think is more technical, so I'll ask Martin about this. On page 125 of our agenda, which is page 5 of your report, there is an emissions intensity section per million of revenue, and then also per full-time employee, and that hasn't been benchmarked back to 2019 or 2021. Nor has it been benchmarked to any other council. And so I just wondered if, Martin, if you had any comment about, where we're sitting with that. Is that, should we, I don't know what to take out of the 15.3.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, on the last page of the report, table 15, there's emissions per KPI, and that looks at base year FY19, FY21 and FY23. And so that does show the trend of tonnes of CO2 per full-time employees and dollars million revenue. So what that showed is that in terms of full-time employees for FY23 was 15.37 tonnes of CO2 for if compared to say FY21 where it was 13.39. So there was an increase in terms of tonnes of CO2 per $million. It was 25.47 in FY21 and it's dropped to 20.59 in FY23. So showing a decrease there. I did also compare, I've just got to find it, sorry, to...
I just have an important announcement. The fire alarm is about to be tested. It's not a drill, so we can stay exactly where we are. But if you do hear the alarm, just don't get a fright, don't freak out. We're just testing it and we don't have to evacuate. We can just ride out the noise. So sorry, just rudely interrupted you before the fire alarm did. There you go. Continue, please.
Thank you. So I was thinking about, what would be an appropriate council to compare with, and one that I had numbers handy was Waipa District Council. So their tonnes of CO2 per $1 million revenue is 31.3 compared to Thames-Coromandel, which is 20.59. Their tonnes of CO2 per employee is 12.8 compared to Coromandel's, which is 15.37. So
that is useful. Thank you.
Except, of course, Waipa didn't have to deal with Cyclone Gabrielle and the storms to the same extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That benchmarking across our industry is a useful thing for me, certainly. Graham, just a quick one about you mentioned targets and initiatives need to be developed. I presume that will go to, because that feels like it's a relatively political decision. Presumably that will come to us at some point in the workshop.
Oh,
okay.
Absolutely. Perfect. Yeah, I'm not setting them myself. Well, I can advise, I can recommend, but ultimately that has to be a political decision. Yeah.
Excellent. Are there any further questions from the floor? Oh, okay. Brilliant. John? Those guys online seem to be quiet now, which is excellent. We value their contribution. In that case, can I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive this motion, which is that we receive the report?
I'll move.
Thank you, Dali. Thank
I'll
you, John.
second.
Thank you, Mark. We've got a thirder as well.
I do need to get my name on the minutes.
Okay, you can do the next one. In that case, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour of the motion say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you very much for your time, Martin.
Thank you, Martin, for your support.
Thank you.
Look forward to this ongoing conversation as we go around. Yes. Excellent. The next item that we have on our agenda is the Group Manager's Report from Lorna. He's right here. Take it away, Lorna.
Okay. I'll take it as read, but I will just step through a couple of things. So we had the social wellbeing strategy we have discussed in a previous a committee meeting. There is money allocated to work on the review of those strategies. In the interim, we have our navigators and our social wellbeing, our community partners group are actually doing an inventory of community groups at the moment. So there's a mapping exercise that's being done. This has been quite beneficial because quite a lot of these community groups actually applied for funding through the Mayor's Relief Fund. So we've been able to go back to them as well, see how they've been spending their money, because we have to do end reports on that. But it's also a good way that we've been able to capture different groups and pull that together. Helen referenced the Waikato Wellbeing Project work. So that again is going to help inform the wellbeing strategy, because we will be, with the surveys and the workshops that are being done with those groups, we'll be able to bring that material to help us inform the strategy as well. So that's just tying in quite well. And those strategies, as I say, will be going around and doing a wider I guess, engagement around the district, and we will be bringing that back later in the year. The other things I might just quickly reference is the Future for Local Government report that was released in March. If councils have had an opportunity to look at that. I think probably some of the key points is just looking around elections and terms is one of the things, and also just about data collection and about having a better, stronger relationship with central government. The other points to go through, we've just talked about the housing work that's being done, and that'll be brought to the workshop at the next committee meeting. There is a couple of slides in there about housing affordability, which was referenced in our economic development report, which we have just discussed. I did also reference just around the workforce planning, and again, that'll be brought back to the committee in a full report at the next meeting. One of the things I did want to talk about, though, was just community-driven projects. So these are projects that are community mandated, and they do meet with the community boards and councillors to look at how we can partner and collaborate. With it being community-led, I just wanted to give an example of the Coromandel Independent Living Trust and the opening of the community hub up there, which was in early March. Again, this is an amazing example of the community driving this project. They came to council and worked through how we could negotiate to give them land. And then to actually build the facility. If you go onto the link there, this gives some real good context about how long it actually takes for something like this to happen and to manage expectations, because, you know, land acquisition and then fundraising, working with all the different agencies is a lot of time, and this took many years and a lot of money. And if you look on that page, the list of funders, not just from council but externally, is significant. And so it's about how we can work in this model better so that we can tap into different sources of funding and make this a more collaborative and successful outcome for the community. I referenced 101 Lindsay Road because that's a project that is in train at the moment, so there is discussions with that trust. The property team are just working through just around the site size, because there is, as you're well aware, there is a commercial, our contractor Open Spaces is currently sited there, so that's being worked along. And same with the Tairua Pawanui River Trail, there's some good progress being made with that group. Again, they have been a trust for many years, and they've done already 3 stages of that trail. They're working on stage 4, which crosses a number of land areas apart from dock, private and council, and also Waka Kotahi. So we will be bringing an MOU to the council in the coming months around that. And finally, just want to reference the community board networking data, which you'll see in the attachment. Some of that isn't reflective actually of all of the boards, because some of the boards had networking sessions during this time frame, and some were still to have them. But just wanting to show the importance of the boards meeting with their communities and their community groups, and just how that's establishing stronger relationships and better information sharing. Interestingly, just wanted to point out that the Coromandel Colville Community Board, they did a site visit around their ward. It was sort of a day trip. We did some social media on that, and that was our strongest and highest reaching post for the week. And really good comments and feedback from people on social media, just about seeing their community board presence around the district.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the members for Lorna about the report? I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Lots of information in here, and I appreciated that last time we had feedback about the way the community board stuff was presented, and that it's you know, easily digestible and really there's a lot of information here for. Thank you. No questions? Oh, I don't have any questions either. Right. Well, in that case, well, can I have a mover to accept the report as it is then, please? Yes. Martin, do you want to second that? Because he does want to.
Yes, please.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Aye. That is carried. Thank you so much. The next item is the Chair's report, and I am also going to take it as read because it's quite short, but I just wanted to add a couple of things into it. So I mentioned that the delegates had heard from, I mentioned a local government event. I went last week, I was lucky enough to attend the LGNZ combined sector meeting with Councillor Connell, the Chief Executive, and the Mayor. And one of the presenters that was there was the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who was talking a lot about the devolution of power from their central system at Whitehall into councils. And I know that the Mayor has sent round an article about that and a little bit more information for the councillors to read. But while he was talking, I was thinking, gosh, this is pretty much what I'd mentioned in terms of the power of greenhouse gas being, having a lot of power at local government to be able to make changes in the way we do things and be leaders in that space. So Andy Burnham's book about the devolution of power is coming out next month, and I've got a copy ordered at Carson's. So once I've finished with it, it's free to be passed around the committee. But I really just wanted to highlight that local government, we're at the front of everything. People see us on the road doing our road trips. They see us at the market. We are quite an important part of people's lives, and I think it's worth mentioning and worth remembering, because we do have a little bit more power than I think sometimes we give ourselves credit for. And with that, that's all I have to say. Somebody would like to move that we accept my ramblings.
I'd like to move those words of wisdom, Ron.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Rika. Okay, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Hey, we're at the close of the meeting. Thank you for the attendance. Thank you for the discussion. I declare the meeting closed at 11:41.